spend a lot of my off time talking to young people, hopefully getting folks engaged in the political process, because we need more young people making decisions for us throughout the state. So as you can see, I have the 132nd Legislative District, which is where we are currently. So OTC, Missouri State, Evangel, and Drury all reside within my legislative district. I'll give you all a little bit of background about me. We'll talk about my job, but feel free to ask questions throughout this whole thing. I want this to be more of a conversation. I grew up in Webster County. I went to high school in Rogersville. I am a first-generation high school graduate. Went to Missouri, did dual enrollment with OTC classes in my high school, and then went to Missouri State University. My degree is in social work. And I honestly was never engaged in the political process at all until I started studying social work. I took a policy course and realized very quickly that everything I wanted to do to help people was dictated by government policy, whether that's state or federal levels. So our senior year, you have to do a practicum internship somewhere, and I decided to go to Jefferson City. I was the first social work student at Missouri State University to go through the legislative internship program, and I spent a legislative session in Jeff City. And it was honestly probably the second week that I was there that I realized elected officials are nobody special. They're regular people, and unfortunately a lot of people at the time did not understand issues around poverty in a way that I thought was beneficial to Missouri citizens. I'm somebody that believes unless you live something or you are deeply engaged in it professionally, it's really hard to understand how to live in a certain whatever. So people in poverty, if you don't live in poverty, it's really hard to understand the right ways to create policy for folks living in poverty. Same for people of different ethnic backgrounds, et cetera. And so I truly believe we need to have everybody at the table when it comes to making public policy. And when I was a college student, there just weren't enough people from the poverty realm, which is something I deeply care about, at the table making decisions around poverty. I'm overcoming a cold, I apologize, so my voice is a little in and out. So I graduated on Friday, and because internships are awesome, and I encourage you to do them, I started working for the U.S. Senate on Monday. I worked here in Springfield for United States Senator Claire McCaskill's office doing constituent services work, which is essentially social work through the Senate. So when folks had issues with like the Department of State getting a passport or their student loans repaid to the Department of Education, they contacted me. And I was a liaison for Missouri to the federal government agencies to help folks navigate whatever issues they were dealing with. I did that for a couple years, and then I went and worked in the campaign side of things. I worked in 2010 on a U.S. Senate race here in Springfield. I was a regional field director, so I was in charge of all of Southwest Missouri. And then I absolutely hated campaigning. I thought it was awful, and decided to go back into the nonprofit sector, where I worked until my legislative seat was open. I worked for a local organization called Care to Learn, and we provide funding for basic needs for students. So anything under hunger, health, and hygiene for kids who are in public schools, we pay for them. So I got to do that for about 8 years. My seat was opened in 2016. The guy before me was termed out. I knew that he was running, or excuse me, that he was not going to be able to run again. But honestly, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to jump in at that time. I had a 1-year-old daughter and 2 older stepchildren. And for those of you, I'm sure you all know, when you are an elected official in the Missouri House, you are gone January through May. And so you're literally, I leave Sunday nights and I come home Thursday nights for 5 months out of the year. And as a mother of 3, that is a little cumbersome. So it took, honestly, a minute for us to decide for me to jump in this election year, just because our youngest was so young. But that year here in Springfield, the city council had added sexual orientation and gender identity protections in our city council, at our city council level. So in the state of Missouri right now, you can be fired or denied housing, like rental properties, for being gay. And Springfield decided, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to add that protection so that you can't be fired simply for being gay. Well, then by a vote of the people, that was overturned. And so that same, honestly, that same night when the election was lost, that's something that's very important to my husband and I, and really that night we stayed up probably till 2 or 3 in the morning discussing it. And as a parent, that's something that we really came to the conclusion of we've got to jump in. This is something we care about, and the policy's not going the way we want it to, so somebody's got to run, so I guess it's me. And so we decided to jump in. I had a primary election and a general, my first go, and I won both of those. I was up for re-election again in 2018. where I obviously won, and then that is also when I became the minority leader of the House of Representatives. So each party in the Missouri House has a leadership hierarchy. We have the Speaker of the House, who's in charge of everybody, and then both sides have floor leaders, assistant floor leaders. We have a whip, we have a caucus chair, vice caucus chair, and a secretary. And my second session, I was the vice chair of our caucus, which was relatively early to jump into that leadership position. So then this time I ran for floor leader and won that election. So what that means is my job is essentially to be captain of the Democrats in the House. I assign all committee assignments. I'm sure you all have discussed a little bit committee structure and all that. So I get to determine where every one of my members serves on the committees that they serve on, and then I'm also in charge of floor strategy. So whenever we're having a debate, I work with my caucus members to determine who wants to talk, what points we need to make, what order we're going to have that strategy, if we're not going to talk at all, what that looks like. I'm also the face of the party for the House, so I do all press conferences, anything dealing with the press, I'm in charge of that. Interactions with the governor's office, with the speaker, any negotiations that we have, I have the honor to get to do that. And then I also am in charge of the campaign side for the Missouri House of Representatives. So in the state constitution, the House and Senate, both political parties, have these campaign infrastructures, the House Democratic Campaign Committee, the House Republican Campaign Committee, and per the Constitution, I am in charge of that entity. So I raise money and I try to recruit candidates to flip seats in the Missouri House of Representatives. So I have that role as well. So that is it very, very quickly, but I imagine you all have lots of questions, so we'll jump to that.
Before we jump to it, could you give us a couple minutes on, as you identify with the Democratic Party, why that party and not some other political party?
Yeah, definitely. So as I said before, I really didn't know anything about politics or parties or anything until I was in college. And in full transparency, my family has always voted Republican. My father is still very much, actually my whole family still votes Republican, regardless of where I am at in my political venture. But really what changed it for me was studying social work. I come from a place where I really put a lot of energy behind equal opportunity for people. I grew up most of my life, my mom was a single parent, and I did grow up on food stamps. My mom utilized state aid. She still waits tables to this day. But we were able to get out of that situation because of state aid. And as I started diving into politics, the policies that I saw the Democrats more pushing were things to help everybody get to an equal playing field. There are things on the other side of the aisle that I do support. I actually will vote both sides. I have a 98% score on the Libertarian scorecard. So my political votes are more across the board than people would imagine, and that probably goes for most elected officials. But I claim the Democratic Party because the policies that they really push for healthcare access for all, education access for everybody, and a more emphasis on people is something that I really believe in, and that's probably the best answer I can give without saying anything negative about the other side.
Well, let's just go ahead and open it up,
Yeah,
get a bunch of questions. We have 100 questions for you from the other classes as well. Tons and tons of great questions. Start us off.
When you said you wanted to put everybody on an equal playing field, what types of people are you talking about?
I literally mean everybody when I say that.
So the people that threw away their lives, pretty much the drugs, you wanted to put them on an equal, like you're trying to build them up to something that they've lost, or are you trying to
So I'll jump in with this. As someone who lost a brother to heroin 2 years ago, I'm not someone who believes that people throw their lives away. I do believe that addiction is a disease, and it's a hereditary disease. A lot of folks in my family have addiction problems, and I've seen it firsthand. Yes, people make choices, but the choices that folks make affect the entire society. My stepbrother, who I lost, left 3 children behind. It's not their fault that their dad made a bad choice, and it was literally one choice. He was not a heroin addict. He decided to try it for the first time and died. So yes, those people too. I think that everyone in America affects everyone else in America. And if we are not supporting each other, then it hurts everybody. Those kids that he left behind, if they don't have opportunities because their dad made a poor choice, they're not going to graduate high school. Every person who doesn't graduate high school costs their state about $200,000 per child. And you're looking at incarceration numbers food stamps, all of those social safety net programs, about $200,000 to $300,000 per person. So if we really want to break it down in numbers, which is something hopefully everyone cares about, is our tax dollars. If we don't help those people who made poor choices, it negatively affects you as well. So, yes.
Can I piggyback off this question? How bad is the opioid epidemic in Missouri?
So right now, the country is actually doing much better. We are seeing huge gains in that, but Missouri is actually having had a 12% increase of opioid deaths in the past year. So Missouri itself is doing catastrophic compared to the states around us. It's not just opioids though, methamphetamines is still extremely high, especially in Greene County, Southwest Missouri. You hear a lot about opioids and a lot of energy around opioids, but methamphetamine is still an extreme problem. And that's one of the disconnects. It's great that we're talking about opioids, but we're not hitting them. The energy has gone to this, leaving this behind, and meth is still extremely high. Do you want me to call on folks? Okay.
Your floor, ma'am.
Yeah.
Your floor.
What's your plan to, I guess, like what's a plan to get rid of that or to lower that?
Work on that, yeah. So there's a lot of things that need to be done. First and foremost, I serve as board president for Better Life and Recovery, which is a community resource center here in Springfield that represents Greene County and the surrounding counties to help folks in recovery. So this is something I am deeply passionate about. There's a lot that we can do legislatively to deal with addiction, but I'm also someone that believes in community resources and community help as well. I don't think that government is the answer for everything, and so I think with this we need to be hitting it from both sides of the equation. There are a lot of resources in the local communities that we need to be increasing with funding to help. It's not just about treatment. I believe more in the reintegration because when folks get treated, unfortunately, there's not a lot of money that goes around, so people may get 2 or 3 weeks of treatment, then they go right back into the same community they were in before, and that's where we see that relapse because we're not changing the world around them. They go back to the same friend groups, the same home, the same lifestyle, and so they're going to continue to use. So I believe in community support structures and really investing in giving folks an alternative. The Springfield Community Resource Center is an awesome organization that does like sober events like paintball and UFC fightings and all of these things and sober atmospheres to help give folks a different lifestyle to be around along with treatment. But from the legislative side, I am someone who believes in harm reduction, that's what it's called. And so those are things like, and this is a super controversial thing to say, but clean needle exchange sites, making sure that when folks are using, we are giving them there's clean resources around them that gives them access to social workers and resources to get them out of addiction and into recovery. That's a legislative change that needs to happen. Prescription drug monitoring program is something you hear a lot about. Missouri is the only state in the country that doesn't have a PDMP. That is something I think we should have, but I don't think it is a solution by any means. Really, every other state is doing it, so we should be doing it as well because it is causing problems between us and our neighboring states when it comes to drug addiction. Folks will come over here to get prescriptions and then go back to their other states, and so we're seeing a lot of issues with that. It's not a solution to the problem by any means. And that's the unfortunate side is we spend every legislative session really trying to get the prescription drug monitoring program up and running, never crosses the finish line, and so we're not talking about other resources because all the energy is going here. So I don't think there's one solution. I think it has to be a community-based approach from our local governments, but then also our local community nonprofit infrastructures and really using resources that exist in the community instead of trying to fix it. Do you have a follow-up question to that? Okay.
So you were talking about like getting them out of the community or something. So how do you plan on paying for that?
A lot of that doesn't cost money. We look at organizations like Better Life and Recovery, which is here in Springfield. There are other groups like this throughout the state of Missouri. They're nonprofits, of course, so they have to have some operating costs. But it's a lot of volunteer-based structures and making sure we have peer specialists, which that is something that does cost money, but it's training that's relatively cost-effective to have folks in those communities to build that structure. But that's not really a government support type of thing. Okay. There were lots of hands up, but I think your hand was up first.
This is a different but similar topic. Recently, a new law has passed over tobacco and tobacco-related. I'm sure you've probably heard about it. I don't know if it's something you deal with, but the city voted to pass a law that made it illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to buy tobacco products, or what are your thoughts on that?
First and foremost, I believe if we're going to allow folks to die for our country, they should have the freedoms that everyone else has. So that is like my more my libertarian thought on that a lot of folks will say. I fully support increasing that age demographic when it comes to the health perspective of that. But because we have young men and women going into the field dying for our country, I don't think that those match up. I would like to see those match up. You know, the data behind increasing the age is there in terms of helping with lung disease and all of those other things. So that the medical data is there, and so I support that philosophy. But I really do have a fundamental problem that if we are sending folks to war, that they don't have, that we're saying you're adult enough to die, but you're not adult enough for this stuff over here, and I have a fundamental problem with that. But that was a local vote. You're not going to see anything like that at the state level in a long time.
What message do you think it might send when you give, like, to rich and poor people, but like, to like poor people when you're like giving more, like you're rewarding them when they maybe don't work as hard, and then like you don't give anything to rich people who probably like work their butts off? Like, what do you think it, like message-wise, like
Yeah,
sends?
well, I will say that first, I think that's a fundamental misconception. I've been in Jeff City for 3 years now, and there have been 0 increases or any benefit. In fact, we have taken many, many benefits away to low-income people, but we have passed over 5 tax cuts for the rich since I've been there in 3 years. Millions upon millions upon millions of dollars for the rich. We've given, just this year alone, we had one bill that gave over $90 million worth of tax breaks to very wealthy corporations in the state of Missouri. So fundamentally, that's just not happening, is my answer to that. But let's dig in a little bit more. So in the state of Missouri, when it comes to our safety net programs, and by that I mean food stamps, child care subsidy, Medicaid, which is our health care, and then we also have TANF. And those programs, most of that is dictated by the federal government, but then we get to add our own parameters to each one of those programs. We are actually, I work very hard on something that is called the cliff effect, and I'll dive into that in a minute. But actually, in the state of Missouri, the way that our programs are created are actually punishing folks for trying to succeed. And so I believe that we need to fundamentally redo our safety net programs. But what I mean by that is, say I am a single mom, and most of these programs you have to be working for to qualify, which is another misconception. A lot of folks don't realize for almost all of them you have to be working to get anything at all if you're an adult. You cannot get health care coverage unless you're working in the state of Missouri as an adult, or unless you're severely disabled. So if I am a single parent and I am getting a child care subsidy, which is something I could qualify for, say I have 3 kids, I cannot make more than $300 a week. It's $341 a week for a single parent of 3 to get any child care help. $341 a week for a single parent of 3. Think about that for a second. It's not a lot of money. But I get help, and I take a pay raise because I'm working. And so I may get, to say, $400 a month in a child care subsidy so that I can go to work. If I take a pay raise that puts me over this financial threshold, say it's 10 cents, and I hit this wall, then I lose all of that money that I'm receiving. And so the way that our structure is created in Missouri is actually punishing folks for trying to earn more and trying to get out of this cycle of poverty. And so I have sponsored legislation every year that I've been in that once you hit that financial threshold, to actually do a taper off system, so that if you get a pay raise, you get a little less money from the state. You get another pay raise, you get a little less money from the state, to try to encourage folks to work harder, and then we ease them off. Because if you're a single mom of 3 and you're getting $400 a month in child care, I don't know if any of you have had kids, but it's about $175 a week for a daycare per child. It's a lot of money. And say you're getting $400 a week, you're barely breaking even, you wonder if it's even worth going to work because of child care. So the state helps. But then you take a pay raise and you lose all of that. Would you change $50 a month in a pay raise for $400 in child care subsidies? You can't make that work. The numbers just do not add up. And unfortunately, the way that our safety net programs are structured in Missouri right now, that's how it is. And so I believe that's where this philosophy of folks just don't want to work comes in. I'll tell you, this was not something that I knew it existed, but it was not going to be like my champion issue until I started knocking doors. We knocked over 40,000 times in my district, my district has a lot of low-income folks who are working, a lot of grandparents raising grandbabies, and I kept knocking doors. I'm like, hey, what's important to you? What are you dealing with here in Springfield? And I got that time and time again. I want to work, but I can't, because every time I take a pay raise or take more hours at work, I lose all of my help from the state, and I can't afford it. $50 for $400 is what folks are dealing with. And so I think that's kind of where that misconception comes from, because we are essentially forcing folks to not work if they want to get that subsidy. And so I believe that we should be creating a structure that supports folks and encourages them to be successful. And we can do that in a cost-effective way. It will actually save us money if we do a taper-off structure. Some other states have already done that. I think there are 3 states who are working on a structure like that. I get folks on both sides of the aisle who support this idea because it obviously saves us money and gets folks off of social services, which everybody wants folks to be successful. We just haven't gotten across the finish line yet. But I do think it's important to note, since I've been in Jefferson City, I served on the budget committee for the first 2 years before I was floor leader. And I am constantly blown away with the amount of tax credits that we're giving to big businesses in the state. My husband's a small business owner. We employ 38 people in Springfield. I fully support small business incentives and helping folks grow their businesses. That's how I feed my children. What we are doing is not that. What we are doing every year is giving millions and millions of dollars away in the state of Missouri to corporations who aren't even from here. This year, there was one bill this year that gave $62 million to General Motors. If anyone's been paying attention to what's happening with General Motors right now, there's a strike going on because they're not giving their employees health benefits anymore. $62 million we gave to an out-of-state corporation to get them to stay here. And it's obviously not going well. So I encourage y'all to really dig in into where our money is going and how we're spending it as a state.
I have a question more focused on food stamps. My son's 5 years old this year. When he was born, food stamps, I was pretty much on it for almost an entire year and a half. And that is how I helped put food on the table. I worked 60 hours a week at that point at a door manufacturing warehouse. And basically I broke even when I paid the rent on the 3-bedroom house and all the amenities that I need there for him and for us to live. And now I see that food stamps, you can only be on it 3 months at a time. And I have a bunch of friends that are barely making ends meet and need the food stamps. And because when that 3-month period hits, now they're all having to go to local food banks, which puts even more stress on the local food banks, which are really supposed to be there for homeless and more poverty people, but you're getting a lot more very on the borderline low-income families,
Right.
putting more stress on local food banks and everything. Is there anything going on to push food stamps back to the part where it was really helping people?
To be very honest with you, in the state of Missouri, no. What you're actually going to see is a push for adding more cumbersome barriers to folks who need help. Have you heard the term work requirements?
Yeah.
Okay, so what work requirements are, and you're going to see that more with Medicaid than food stamps, but it's a part of this conversation too. Right now in the state of Missouri, as you should, to qualify for any safety net program, you have to prove that you need it. You have to show your work stubs, you have to show if you're not working, you're applying for jobs, you have to show how many children you have to turn in a whole lot of paperwork all the time, which you should have to qualify. I totally believe that. But there's a move in the state of Missouri to add an additional what we're called work requirements, where every week folks have to turn in additional paperwork to continue to prove their eligibility in a more frequent manner. The downside to this is, have any of you ridden the city bus in Springfield? One. How was that experience for you? Awful, right? How many hours did it take you to get where you needed to go?
Not very long, but at the same time, I also I don't want to say that I had the same experience that everybody else did. I have a little bit of a different outlook on that kind of stuff. So I'm ex-military, and I really didn't like being crowded out.
Okay.
But no,
So,
it's not fun.
It's not an easy task. So, if some of the unintended consequences of some of this legislation is okay, if I have to go to the Social Security office every week instead of every month, I have to take my kids, so I'm a single parent, I take my kid or two on the city bus, and I need to get from here to here. When I was in social work school at Missouri State, they made us ride the bus and go to all the different places that somebody would have to go. So I need to go to Social Security Administration, I need to go to the utility office, I have to go here. It took like 2 hours to get what would take me 10 minutes to drive. And I imagine doing that with a small child all day long, and then you go to these offices and then you sit there for 3 hours before you get to talk to a person, and then you have to make photocopies. I don't have a printer at home that can make photocopies, so if I need to make photocopies, I usually go to like FedEx or something. So then you're going to all these different places to try to prove that you are eligible for food stamps. Well, you could spend those 8 hours working at your job and actually making money so that you could get off food stamps. And so that's one of those unintended consequences that we look at where, again, folks who aren't living it or aren't in those fields don't really think about the fact that this person's going to have to take their 4 kids on the city bus for 4 hours to try to get a photocopy of something to then take somewhere else, when we already have all of that information through the federal government databases as well as the state databases. The IRS has everything that they need. But instead of cross-referencing our databases, which is a whole separate conversation, we force folks to jump through these hoops that then just continue to keep them in poverty. So to answer your question, no, there is nothing that's going to make it better in the state of Missouri in the near future. There are not enough elected officials that think that we should.
Completely different topic. So I was doing a review of some of the House bills and stuff, and I saw House Bill 2647, the Enough is Enough Act.
Okay.
I was just kind of curious about it because there's been several news stories, like the one in particular that I printed off was, I think it was the University of Sacramento, like 2 students were accused of rape. And it turned out that the allegations were false, but they like were expelled, had to like sue the school, lost a bunch of money, like their reputations were destroyed, you know, like a whole bunch of stuff. And just reading through the bill, like I didn't see any sort of like, I mean, like what's the vetting for Title IX coordinators? Like what's like going to be a requirement for that?
Yeah,
like,
so
what
the
kind
Title
of protections is somebody who's accused, like what do they get?
Yeah, so Title IX is actually a federal program. And so this bill was actually somebody else's bill that then I took on and someone else took on, so which happens often because people term out. So when Betsy DeVos was put in charge of the Department of Education at the federal level, there were a lot of changes made to the Title IX program. What Title IX is really, and to try to not get in a lot of the weeds, they have certain regulations, but then they have suggestions for universities. And prior to her taking over that department, there was a lengthy, it's like a 12-page document, and I'm happy to send it to you if you want to see it, of suggestions for universities to create their process, their appeals process. And so if I was to make an allegation, what that looks like, I'll pause here. Every university gets to create their own. So there is no like mandate from state or federal governments that say this is exactly what you have to do to protect your students. So each university gets to create their own. There was suggestions from the Department of Higher Education that said this is what we believe you should do to protect your students on both sides. And those suggestions were done away with when she took over the Department of Education, and they put out different suggestions. What that bill does is just suggest the previous recommendations beforehand. Okay. So there are no mandates, it's just a suggestion. And really the purpose of that was there's been a big shift to try to create at the higher education institutional level to make it be like a courtroom, where there is an opportunity for lawyers to come in and have interrogations from both sides, and then recommendations are then made to law enforcement from the higher institution levels. I'm not someone that believes the higher ed institutions should be the courtroom. I believe that the institution should have local control and dictate what that looks like, and let the police officers and that side handle the criminality of it. I don't think that the university should. And so that's really the big difference there. Yeah.
Abortion is an issue that's really important to me, and I saw on your page you had like several pro-choice endorsements, but I just wanted to hear from you what your stance was on abortion.
Yeah, definitely.
And specifically, just on top of that, Missouri recently passed a heartbeat bill that's being held up in court right now.
Yeah.
Can you weigh in on this issue broadly and that
sure.
issue specifically?
Yeah, so I am a pro-choice person. I hate to make it so black and white because I don't believe that it is that way. But I do believe that the government shouldn't be engaged in personal bodily autonomy issues. I believe it's a personal liberty issue, and I don't think government should cross into House Bill 126 is what is known as the heartbeat ban. There are 8 states in the country who have passed similar legislation. One may argue that ours is the most intense, if not the second most intense to Mississippi, depending on which way you look at it. What this bill did was it makes it so that you cannot have an abortion past 8 weeks, even including of cases of rape and incest. There's also a clause in there that says you have to notify as a minor both parents. So if dad rapes you and you get pregnant and want to have an abortion, you have to call your dad and talk to him about it, which was a big piece of that I had a lot of problems with. So there's that clause. There's the 8-week clause without rape and incest. There's also a clause that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, the morning after pill, which prevents pregnancy, becomes illegal in the state of Missouri. And so those are like the big pieces of it. Fundamentally, from my perspective, the science does not back up the heartbeat piece of this. If you look at the science and the data, which is something I really try to do when I'm looking at public policy, the heart is not even beginning to be established. That heartbeat that we're looking at 8 weeks is actually blood flow through blood vessels. Now I understand that this is a very personal conversation and folks have a lot of personal, especially religious opinions around this. But I am someone that believes when it comes to public policy, my personal beliefs and religious opinions should not be a part of that conversation. I try to look at the science behind it as much as I can. But there's no legislator that's not going to let their personal feelings get involved in everything, and that's just the reality of it. So where this bill is currently at now. So the bill passed. There was a petition to do a referendum, which is when, say, the legislature passes something that Missourians don't like. You can do a referendum petition, gather signatures, and take it to a ballot to say we don't like what you did. There's also the initiative petition process, which is the reverse of that. If we don't do something, citizens can say, we want you to do this, and gather signatures and put it in the Constitution that way. So there's both sides of this. So whenever they're trying to do a referendum to undo something that we did, citizens have until that bill becomes law to do that. Bills become law on August 28th. And so there was an initiative referendum language submitted to the Secretary of State, and they have a certain time period to approve that ballot language to then gather signatures to then bring it to a ballot. The Secretary of State was found guilty of violating that timeline by a court of law, saying that he illegally withheld that language, but the courts said, but we're not going to do anything about it. He did it, it was illegal, but so what? And so when he finally released the language, there was about a week left, so there was not enough time to get this ballot signatures to put it on the ballot. So that was kind of like one angle that folks were. The bill itself is currently being held up in court. ACLU and Planned Parenthood filed a lawsuit saying that this was unconstitutional, which it is, and every Republican who voted for the bill will agree with us it's unconstitutional, because the point of this bill is to overturn Roe versus Wade. The folks who drafted the bill are on record saying that. The bill was crafted so that it could withstand in court to try to get it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court so that we can be the ones to undo it. So right now it is in the first stage. The court sided with ACLU and Planned Parenthood the first go, and so it is still currently legal to get abortion in the state of Missouri.